notice. I give the call to the honourable member for Berowra.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister and concerns his ministerial code. Following the breach of the ministerial code by the Minister for Regional Development, Local Government and Territories, I refer to media reports that the Assistant Minister for Health has invested in managed funds or unit trusts which in turn have significant shareholdings in Australian healthcare businesses or private health insurance businesses. Does the Minister have an obligation under clause 3.12 of your ministerial code to notify you of this conflict of interest?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for his question. I refer to the ministerial code, section 3.11 on shareholdings, and it says this: in recognition of the collective responsibility that ministers bear in relation to cabinet decisions, this code requires that ministers divest themselves of investments and other interests in any public or private company or business other than public superannuation funds or publicly listed managed funds or trust arrangements where, Part 1, the investments are broadly diversified and the minister has no influence over investment decisions of the fund or trust. The Assistant Minister has completely complied with that. And 2, the fund or trust does not invest to any significant extent in a business sector that could rise to a conflict of interest with the Minister's public duty. And the Assistant Minister has complied with that. The Assistant Minister has advised, she has ensured that she has been compliant with this. The Assistant Minister also wrote to me this morning to formally advise that she's taken the additional step of divesting all of her interests.
Give the call to order. Give the call to member for Holt.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Treasurer. How will the October budget help Australians deal with the cost of living pressures and respond to the challenges facing our economy?
Give the call to the Treasurer.
Yeah, thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and can I thank the member for Holt for her question. Can I congratulate her on her first speech in this place earlier in the week. Also an important week in the economy, Mr Speaker. We had the interest rates decision on Tuesday, the national accounts on Wednesday, and today a speech by the Governor of the Reserve Bank. And what those three events all did is that they laid bare the challenges that we confront in our economy right now. The skyrocketing cost of living, falling real wages, labour and skills shortages, issues around business investment and productivity, some of these issues which have been around for some time now. And these were the key focuses of the Jobs and Skills Summit last week, and they will be the key focus as well of the budget that we hand down next month here in this place. This is the complex combination of challenges that we confront as we put this budget together. And budgets are always about competing priorities, and the job, as always, the job for us this time around is to comb through the complexity and to make sure that we are satisfying our key economic objectives, and ours are very, very clear. First of all, in the budget, to trim the waste and rorts, which has been a defining feature of the budget for too long. Secondly, to use that money to invest instead in the productive capacity of the economy, to deal with the issues in our supply chains and to make sure that we can lift the speed limit on the economy so it can grow without adding to these inflationary pressures. And thirdly, by responsibly dealing where we can with the cost of living pressures that Australians confront right now, whether it be in childcare, whether it be medicine costs or TAFE fees, or in other important areas, as well as getting wages moving again in our economy after almost a decade now of wage stagnation and deliberate wage suppression from those opposite. And the important balance to strike, Mr Speaker, when we provide this responsible cost of living relief in the budget next month is to make sure that we're providing that relief without adding to inflationary pressures. So we're providing that relief in a way that also satisfies our broader economic objectives. In childcare, cost of living relief, but with an economic dividend. Medicines, similarly. TAFE fees, similarly. The list goes on, and getting wages moving in a strong and sustainable way once again as well. We want to make sure that we don't add to the pressure on the Reserve Bank when it comes to interest rate decisions. We want to take some of the sting out of inflation over the medium term. The best way to do that is to provide that relief in a responsible way and invest in the issues in our supply chains as well. Mr Speaker, a decade now, a wasted decade of missed opportunities and warped priorities and deliberate wage stagnation have left Australians and their budget and their economy more vulnerable. The budget will make them more resilient.
Treasurer's time has concluded. Give the call to the Leader of the Opposition.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister, and it refers to the Ministerial Code. I referred to the Prime Minister's comments on 8 July this year when he said, and I quote, "Well, what we need is transparency. I want politics to be cleaned up. And that's why we will have strict adherence to the Ministerial Code of Conduct," end quote. Prime Minister, we're now in a situation where ministers are liquidating their interests at a rate of knots. And given that 3 ministers have disclosed shareholdings when your code prohibits this, who assesses this strict adherence and why have you so dismally failed to enforce it?
Give the call to the Prime Minister.
Tell us about your blind trust. What an
The Attorney-General.
I thank the Leader of the Opposition for his question. The fact is that my entire ministerial team have been entirely transparent, which is why you're able to ask the questions and go down the rabbit holes that you've tried to do. But unfortunately, for the Leader of the Opposition's objectives, they're cul-de-sacs. They're cul-de-sacs because the code has been dealt with. My ministers are fully aware of it. And let me just say this, that if the Leader of the Opposition applied a similar code to those opposite, then 1, 2, 3, 4 would all have not been able to sit.
Order.
Would not have been able to sit in the ministry for 9 long years. And I tell you what, if you want to talk about integrity, you're going to have a big chance. Your big chance is next week, when there's a National Anti-Corruption Commission bill presented to this parliament. That's your big chance. That's your big chance to put up your hand and say, we have heard the message, we will support a National Anti-Corruption Commission because we will be putting forward the legislation next week. You said, of course, that you'd deliver a National Anti-Corruption Commission in the last term of parliament. In the last term. It was a commitment you made prior to the 2019 election, and we waited at the end of 2018 for the bill to be tabled. Then we waited in 2019, and then 2020, and then 2021, and then 2022. And it didn't happen. Well, guess what? Next week the bill will be tabled. We'll see whether the opposition are prepared to support it.
Order. The member for Longman. Give the call to the member for Boothby.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Health and Aged Care. How will the Albanese Labor government's plan to make medicines cheaper improve the lives of millions of Australians?
Give the call to the Minister for Health and Aged Care.
Well, thank you, Mr Speaker, and I thank my electoral neighbour, the member for Boothby, for her question, because the PBS is one of Labor's proudest legacies, along with Medicare, one of the twin pillars of Australia's universal health care. Hard fought at the time, fought and contested tooth and nail by the Liberal Party, but now a deeply entrenched part of Australia's social fabric. And in just the first 100 days of this government, Mr Speaker, we have already approved 23 new or amended listings on the PBS. Last week, Zejula was listed for the first time for the treatment of ovarian cancer. Now, we all know too well in this place, Mr Speaker, that ovarian cancer survival rates tragically remain stubbornly low at only about 50% over 5 years. And this listing will provide new hope to about 300 patients every year. Each course of treatment of Zejula costs a whopping $130,000. But the good news is that this PBS listing will bring that price down to just $42.50. And the even better news, Mr Speaker, is that from January next year, that cost will come down even further to just $30. A course of Zejula involves 20 prescriptions, Mr Speaker, so that saving will amount to $250 for each of those 300 Australian women. Those 300 women dealing with the enormous challenge of ovarian cancer will be among the 3.6 million Australians, Mr Speaker, who benefit from the biggest cut to the price of medicines in this country's history. At a time of huge pressure on household budgets, this will be a huge relief. Single mum Carrie yesterday sent me a picture of the 2 medications that she's supposed to take every single day, and she wrote, "Here are 2 things I take that are over $42, and because of the cost, I don't take them every day as I should." Are they actually reducing to that much? That would be amazing. Almost 1 million other Australians defer taking medicines prescribed by their doctor because of cost, just like Carrie. And under our plan, that will change. For households with multiple scripts, the savings are going to run to hundreds and hundreds of dollars every year. Jeannie wrote to me. She said, "Thanks, Albo." That's how this government runs. We get written to, and people thank the Prime Minister, as is completely appropriate. She said, "My family spends a few $100s a month on
Members
scripts,
on my left.
and this will definitely make a huge difference." And Andrea wrote, "Brilliant news, brilliant news. Hubby has 4 scripts a month for his heart condition, and this will help our budget enormously." Mr Speaker, our plan for cheaper medicines provides millions of Australians with vital cost of living relief and helps ensure that they're not going to go without medicines they need for their good health.
Give the call to the Leader of the Australian Greens.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. The federal government is now being asked to approve one of the 114 new coal and gas projects in the pipeline, the massive Mount Pleasant coal mine expansion in New South Wales. Will the government block this new coal project, including by putting a climate trigger in our environment laws, or will Labor keep opening new coal and gas projects because, as your Resources Minister outrageously said, it's just, quote, "the bubbles in your soda stream. We've got to keep it in balance how we think about carbon dioxide"?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. As the honourable member knows, this project has gone through its approval processes at the state level. It will now begin the federal level processes before the Minister for the Environment. The Minister for the Environment will take the same assiduous, careful, methodical and proper approach as she's taken to all environmental approvals she's dealt with so far.
I give the call to the member for McEwen.
Mr Speaker, my question is to the Attorney-General. Why has the government had to establish an inquiry into secret appointments by the previous government?
I give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the member for McEwen for his question. The decision by the member for Cook to appoint himself to administer 5 additional portfolios without telling the Australian people, and in the case of 4 of the portfolios without even telling the relevant minister, fundamentally undermined the principles of responsible government that are reflected in the Australian Constitution. And even worse, this is what the Solicitor-General concluded about this behaviour, and I quote, "An unpublicised appointment to administer a department fundamentally undermines not just the proper functioning of responsible government, but also the relationship between the ministry and the public service." End quote. Few are in any doubt that the former Prime Minister—
Order. I'll just ask the Attorney-General to resume his seat. Order. The Minister for Climate Change. I give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. The government has established an inquiry. Into this matter. The former High Court Judge Virginia Bell has been asked to look at this matter, and consistent with the Sub Judice Convention, it is not appropriate for this matter to be being canvassed in the House.
To resume his seat. Order. On my right. Order. The House will come to order so I can hear the Leader of the House. I call the Leader of the House.
Thanks, Mr Speaker. House of Representatives practice goes in great detail about the Sub Judice Convention, makes clear that it goes nowhere near an inquiry of this nature. And the question was in order as you ruled, and it's very clear that there's not even an objection being made that in any way the minister was being anything other than relevant to the question he was asked.
I call the Attorney-General. I'm listening closely to his answer and will be taking the views of the manager into my decision going
Thank
forward.
you, Mr Speaker. I'll repeat, few are in any doubt that the former Prime Minister's conduct was indefensible. The Shadow Minister for Home Affairs has even called on him to leave the parliament. But there are still many questions that remain unanswered, and that is why the inquiry that the Prime Minister announced with me on the 26th of August is necessary. What precisely were the facts and circumstances surrounding these secret appointments? The only account we've had is a self-pitying, self-serving and self-justifying account by the member for Cook, who appears to remain pathologically incapable of accepting responsibility for his own behaviour, let alone showing genuine contrition. What precisely were the implications arising from these appointments on, for example, the functioning of relevant departments and statutory bodies, or on the accountability of the executive to the parliament? And what steps can the current government take to make sure that this never happens again? The distinguished jurist and former High Court Justice, the Honourable Virginia Bell AC, is very well placed to answer these and other questions, which is why she's been appointed to this inquiry. She will be supported by my department in undertaking the important work that she is going to do. This sorry saga does speak poorly to the culture of cover-up and secrecy inside the former coalition government. Most Australians were well aware of the former coalition government's addiction to cover-up and secrecy, but what this particular scandal tells us, is that the culture of cover-up and secrecy inside the former government was so insidious and so corrosive that senior ministers, including the Prime Minister, couldn't even keep each other informed about the significant—
I give the call. The manager has taken a point on relevance. I give the call to the manager and I'd ask him to state the point of order.
Well, again, it's a sub judice convention, Mr Speaker.
There's no point of order. Resume your seat. There's no point of order. The Leader of the House.
If I may.
Sub judice. Do you want a judicial inquiry?
To the point of order, I appreciate the Manager of Opposition Business tried to show authority by arriving with a copy of the standing orders. The sub judice convention is not referred to in the standing orders. It's referred to in practice. He's going through there now, directing to pages 521 and 522. The sub judice convention in particular applies, the House has previously found, when you're dealing with something in the order of a jury trial, where there is a sense that what is said in Parliament could have an implication on the justice that is then shown. To think in any way that debate in this Parliament over the behaviour of the former government would have an impact on former High Court judge in that way is something that the convention goes nowhere near. Practice is clear on that, and is an extraordinary claim to be made.
I thank the manager. I thank the Leader of the House. The Attorney-General with 16 seconds to go.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker. I'd repeat, the culture of cover-up and secrecy inside the former government was so insidious that senior ministers could not even keep each other informed about significant matters, even if they were concealing matters that went to the proper functioning of responsible government.
Order.
Those opposite should hang their heads in shame.
Order. Order. Members on my right, give the call to the Manager of Opposition Business.
My question is to the Attorney-General, and it relates to the Ministerial Code. I refer to the fact that he has disclosed an investment in an actively managed Australian equities fund, the Pengana Emerging Companies Fund, which reports amongst its holdings businesses affected by the government's regulatory settings such as Telco Unity Wireless Limited, healthcare company Helios Limited and health insurer NIB. Is the Attorney-General satisfied that this investment does not create a perception of a conflict of interest?
Give the call to order. The manager was heard in silence. I'm calling the Attorney-General.
I thank the honourable member for his question. I have fully complied with the Ministerial Code of Conduct the Prime Minister earlier, in answer to similarly groundless questions from the opposition on this matter, read out the passage from the Ministerial Code of Conduct. You've asked the question, you should listen to the answer.
Order.
You don't like it.
Order. The Attorney-General returned to the question.
Thank you, Mr Speaker.
Order. Members on my left.
As the Prime Minister explained in reading out the relevant passage from the Ministerial Code of Conduct, it is absolutely in order for ministers to own shares in publicly listed managed investment trusts. I'd hope that some of those opposite would know what they are, where the minister concerned has no control over the investments made by that managed investment trust. That is my position. And what's extraordinary is that the level of transparency that we have provided as a cabinet and as a ministry and as members of this parliament in the register of interests that these people opposite have been going through and raking through, that level of transparency was never provided by those opposite while they were in government, and indeed those opposite, when they were in government, permitted shareholdings in private companies, permitted shareholdings in public companies because they didn't care about any conflicts of interest. They didn't care about the appearance of conflicts of interest, and they didn't care about the actual conflict of interest. We do. We are a government of integrity, and those opposite would do well to have a look at how this should be done, because you didn't know in office how this should be done.
Order. Order. I give the call to the member for Reid.
My question is to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy. Why is it so important to be upfront with the Australian people about the reliability and affordability of energy supplies? What are the consequences of not disclosing critical details, and how is the Albanese Labor government restoring leadership in the area?
I give the call to the Minister for Climate Change and Energy.
Well, thanks very much, Mr Speaker. I thank the honourable member for Reid for her question, and I'm very pleased to inform her and the House that about 6 minutes ago the government's climate change bill passed the Senate, 37 votes to 30. That's what restoring leadership is all about. It is well on its way to becoming the law of the land, Mr Speaker. And in relation to the leadership we have to show and the damage we have to repair, the House knows the impacts of 10 years of delay and denial and dysfunction. And what we've seen is 10 years of underinvestment in renewable energy and in electricity generation. And that's what the Act is all about, sending the message to investors that Australia is open for business. Because the House will recall the 4 unfun facts of the previous government's record. The fact that 4 gigawatts of energy generation left the system and only 1 gigawatt came on. The fact that the previous minister promised almost $1 billion of investment and didn't deliver 1 watt, not 1 watt of energy. The fact that their signature policy, Snowy 2.0, is running 18 months late. And the fact that the minister intervened, the then minister, the now Shadow Treasurer, intervened to change the law so that an electricity price rise would be hidden from the Australian people. Now, as unacceptable, as morally unacceptable as that is, I understand why he did it. The implications were very significant. What the previous minister hid from the Australian people was, for example, for New South Wales, an average rise of $227 for a New South Wales household, or up to $1,130 for a small business. That's what the now Shadow Treasurer hid from the Australian people. Now, that's bad enough, Mr Speaker, but I saw the other day the Shadow Treasurer interviewed on Sky News, and he was asked about this. And he was asked about why he intervened to change the law to hide the electricity rise. And he said, no, this is a report from the AER, not from the government. Let's be very clear about that. This is a report from the AER. Let's be very clear. It wasn't me, he says. The trouble is, Mr Speaker, when you change the law, there's a record. They keep records of these things. And at the front it says, Angus Taylor, Minister for Industry, Energy and Emissions Reduction. I know there was more than one of them, but this was you. This was actually you. And on the back, on the regulation, the regulation change says about the date of the report, omit the 1st of May and substitute the first business day after 25th of May. It didn't occur to the now Shadow Treasurer that that was after the election. I tabled the regulation, Mr Speaker. This guy wants to be the Treasurer of Australia now. He's not fit to be the Treasurer of local PNC, Mr Speaker, with what he's hidden from the Australian people. I apologise to the PNC Treasurers around Australia. We're all fine people. But this is the leadership we are showing to get over 10 years of denial and dishonesty.
Order. I give the order. The House will come to order. There is far too much noise. I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Attorney-General and it relates to the Ministerial Code. I refer to the Attorney-General's disclosure—
Order. The Deputy Leader will resume her seat. Order. Members on my right. When a member is asking a question, they will be heard in silence. I'm going to ask the Deputy Leader to begin her question again, and I'm asking for silence, particularly on my right. I give the call to the Deputy Leader of the Opposition.
My question is to the Attorney-General and it relates to the Ministerial Code. I refer to the Attorney-General's disclosure that he invests in the Green Cape Broadcap Fund. Does this fund hold shares in Omni Bridgeway, a listed litigation funding business, which recently issued an ASX statement welcoming a decision from the Attorney-General? And if so, is he satisfied that this shareholding does not give rise to a perception of a conflict of interest?
Order. I give the call to the Attorney. Members on my left will cease groaning. I give the member for Moreton is on thin ice again. I give the call to the Attorney-General.
Thank you very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the honourable member for her question. I'm going to read 3.11 of the Code of Conduct for Ministers, because it's important that its exact terms be understood. In recognition of the collective responsibility that ministers bear in relation to Cabinet decisions, this code requires that ministers divest themselves of investments and other interests in any public or private company or business other than public superannuation funds or publicly listed managed funds or trust arrangements where 1. The investments are broadly diversified and the minister has no influence over investment decisions of the fund or trust, and 2. The fund or trust does not invest to any significant extent in a business sector that could give rise to a conflict of interest with the minister's public duty. Now,
the Leader of the Opposition. Order. Order. Members on my left.
I will examine the matter that has been raised.
Order. Members
I will examine
on my
the matter that has been
left.
raised by the honourable member, and I can assure the honourable member, and I can assure members of this House, I can assure members of this House that I have complied at all times with the Code of Conduct for Ministers. And it's a very significant matter. That's why I've undertaken to look at the matter that has been
Members
raised.
on my left will cease interjecting.
That is why I will look at the matter that has been raised by the honourable member, but I can assure the House that every single one of the publicly listed managed funds that my private superannuation fund invests in have been fully disclosed to this House. They are all, as I say, publicly listed managed funds. They are all investments that are broadly diversified, and they are all funds in which I have no influence over investment decisions of that fund or trust.
Order. Members on my left will cease interjecting before we move forwards with question time. Give the call to the member for Hasluck.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Deputy Prime Minister. What policy changes will the Albanese Labor government make to ensure effective procurement of our nation's ADF capability in order to defend Australia's economic and security interests? And why are these changes important?
Give the call to the Deputy Prime Minister and Minister for Defence.
Well, can I thank the member for her question, and acknowledge her service to our nation's Defence Force. On the 3rd of August, the government announced the Defence Strategic Review, which is being asked to consider the complex strategic circumstances which we face, what it means that we are within the 10-year threat window, which the former government rightly observed exists for our country, and what that means in terms of the kind of defence force that we need to build for the future to keep us safe. And to that end, Sir Angus Houston and Stephen Smith are casting a critical eye over the integrated investment plan, the 10-year procurement schedule for our Defence Force, because a prudent management of that schedule is fundamentally important to building a powerful Defence Force. But that task has been made so much more difficult by the legacy which has been left to us by those opposite. Now, when it came to hoopla, the Liberals were the gold standard. When it came to defence, there were press releases by the hour, bells and whistles, streamers and balloons. They literally had Top Gun music when they were doing defence announcements. They truly were the P.T. Barnum of defence procurement. But when it came to delivery, well, that was actually a completely different question. Frigates running late, offshore patrol vessels running late, a lost decade when it comes to our future submarines as they chopped and changed from one country to the next. As we came to office, we've inherited 30 major projects running over time, 17 major projects running over budget to an accumulated total of more than $4 billion. Now, the Leader of the Opposition used to love to come to this dispatch box and talk about how much money the Liberals spent on defence. Well, can I tell the House, it doesn't count as defence spending if you spend the money on absolutely nothing. It doesn't count as defence spending if you flush that money down the toilet. It's not as though we can go onto the battlefield and overwhelm our adversary by running up to them and waving a copy of the budget papers in their face. This was the single most inept, incompetent, negligent government when it came to the management of Australia's defence budget. Well, Mr Speaker, let me say the age of vaudeville is over. There are not going to be any Top Gun announcements from the Albanese government. What you will get is serious, prudent management of the defence budget, because we understand that that is the way that we'll get the submarines in the water quicker, we'll get the OPVs and the frigates back on track, and in doing that we are going to build a potent and capable defence force which will keep our country safe in the future.
And I give the call to the member for Canberra.
Thank you, Speaker. My question is to the Minister for Government Services. How will the Albanese Labor government's delivery of its election commitment to establish a Royal Commission into robo-debt bring justice to robo-debt victims?
Give the call to the Minister for the National Disability Insurance Scheme. Order. And the Minister for Government Services. Members on my left.
Thank you. Thank you, Mr Speaker. And I thank the member for Canberra for a question. As Australians are aware, robo-debt is probably one of the most shameful chapters in public administration in the nation's history. And that wasn't just the view of the current government, it's the view of the federal court and the view of hundreds of thousands of people.
The member for Barker.
Just to remind those opposite, robo-debt occurred on their watch. Between July of 2015 and November of 2019, over 400,000 of our fellow Australian citizens who rely on the safety net were targeted by an unlawful scheme. The scheme was called out to be unlawful almost from when the first debt notices started going out. But unfortunately, the current opposition and then government for 4.5 years ignored the pleas of those who were unlawfully targeted, ignored the decisions of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal, ignored the advice from the Australian Tax Office, ignored whistleblowers, ignored the now government, then opposition, raising and advocating, ignored the legal aid commissions around Australia. And it was a class action, only a class action which Labor helped push for, which actually forced the government to admit the scheme was unlawful, and only at the door of the court, because then the ministers and senior public servants overseeing this unlawful freight train of misery against hundreds of thousands of citizens, then those ministers may have had to give evidence in the class action. And when faced with giving evidence, miraculously the government folded its tents, settled the claim for $1.7 billion, paid interest of $112 million, but the government then has never ever satisfactorily explained matters. So it is left to a Royal Commission to be chaired by Justice Catherine Holmes. It'll report on April the 18th next year, and it'll get to the bottom of questions which unfortunately the previous government never answered. Questions like, who was responsible for its design, development and establishment? What was the advice and the processes that informed its design and implementation? Were any concerns at any stage ever raised about the legality of the scheme? It'll also look in relation to concerns raised about robo-debt once it was initiated. Were the risks ever identified? Was there advice from the Australian Tax Office and documentary proof that the government ignored? Were there advice from affected individuals and other agencies? What did the government do, the then government do, in response to adverse decisions of the Administrative Appeals Tribunal? The old government, the current opposition, have said that this Royal Commission is unnecessary. Yet again, they're shortchanging the vulnerable. The victims of this scheme are owed the justice of the truth and finding out why did the last government treat them so illegally.
Give the call to the member for Kooyong.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister regarding the last government's $18 million grant to the Australian Future Leaders Foundation, an initiative of the Department of the Prime Minister and Cabinet in consultation with the Office of the Governor-General. Will your government commit to reviewing other discretionary grants to charities and to community organisations made by the Morrison government?
Order. I give the call to the Prime Minister.
I thank the member for Kooyong for her question.
Order.
The government has indeed been going through, line by line, the commitments that were made by the former government. In some cases, they were made in budgets. In some cases, they were announced during the election campaign as part of what became a growing feature of the former government's budgets, which was the so-called contingency funds for contingencies, i.e. in case of emergency in the electorate of Kooyong break glass. That didn't really work all that well. We know, of course, for example, the abuse of the commuter car parks program, where commuter car parks, some $65 million in the electorate of Kooyong was promised. That, of course, just disappeared because in some cases they were promising commuter car parks where there weren't actually train stations for commuters to get on the train. But the government indeed, as part of the review, has indicated, and I can confirm that a decision has been made by our expenditure review process to not proceed with the $18 million that was allocated for the Australian Future Leaders program. I must say a program that didn't, in terms of scrutiny of the details that were there, which in our view was not worthy of proceeding with, and which was also to receive $4 million in recurrent funding in perpetuity. The fact is that we have inherited $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt, and so therefore we have had to make some difficult decisions. And the Governor-General was an advocate of this program. I make no criticism of the Governor-General whatsoever. And I indeed informed the Governor-General of my government's position as a matter of courtesy to him and out of a matter of respect for him. But we will be going through, line by line, getting rid of the rorts and waste that dominated the budget, that were a part of the $1 trillion of Liberal Party debt. And we'll also, of course, know that whether it was sports rorts, whether it was commuter car park rorts, the so-called pork and ride scheme, or whether it be other programs, they are addicted. They are addicted to abuse of taxpayer funds. This government intends to deliver for taxpayers, not make decisions based upon the political map.
I give the call. Order. I do not need any more yelling from the member for Barker. He is warned. I give the call to the member for Fremantle.
Thank you, Mr Speaker. My question is to the Prime Minister. Prime Minister, what can we expect will be the response of the Australian business community to the passing of the government's climate change legislation?
Give a call to the Prime Minister.
Thanks very much, Mr Speaker, and I thank the member for Fremantle, not just for the question but for his advocacy for climate change action. He has been a very strong advocate in his local electorate and around the country of the need for Australia to move forward into this century because we've been held back. We know that under the previous government we saw 4 gigs out and 1 gig in when it came to energy production.
The Prime Minister will just pause. The member for Barker on a point of order.
Simply drawing the Speaker's attention to the clock. It hasn't reset, and I ask you to draw your attention to that.
Thank the member for Barker for his assistance, and I'll ask the clock to be reset, and I'll ask the Prime Minister to continue his answer.
I thank the member for Barker for his most substantial contribution he's made since he joined this chamber. The fact is that renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy. Renewable energy is the cheapest form of energy, which is why our program, our Powering the Nation plan, will lead to a lowering of power prices. And that's what the business community understand. That's why the Business Council of Australia support it. That's why the Australian Industry Group support it, and that's why the Australian Chamber of Commerce and Industry support it as well. All of the major business groups saying to those opposite, get out of the way. We've had a decade of denial, and what we need is a government that has a program that encourages investment, because investment is the key to lowering prices for businesses. That's why they want to do it. But it's not just Australian investors. Yesterday I met with Ignacio Galan, the chairman and CEO of Iberdrola. Now, they are major global investors in renewable energy. They are one of the world's largest offshore wind developers, and they've commissioned the largest green hydrogen plant in Europe. The green hydrogen plant there in Europe, just near Madrid, that is occupying a space previously held by a coal-fired power station, previously held by that, but creating jobs for the local communities in new industries. Now, on Monday, Iberdrola announced plans to invest another $4.4 billion in renewable energy in Australia. That's what we'll see as a result of the passing of this legislation, and I thank all those in the House and the Senate who supported this legislation. And on that basis, I ask that further questions be placed on the notice paper.